I think the share screen, there it goes. Thank you, sir. All right. As Drew mentioned, I'm going to be talking about overcoming in situ chemical oxidation limitations with ferric iron activated persulfates. My presentation is going to build on some of the topics that Tim Colgan touched on and outlined during his presentation, but then go further on the persulfate side. Again, I'm Will Moody, and I'm excited to be here. I am calling in from beautiful Monmouth County, New Jersey. So with that, I will get started with a little outline for everyone. We did get a comment already that it would be helpful if recognized limitations on each technology are discussed. So for that attendee, you are in luck because I talk about three primary limitations associated with in situ chemical oxidation. But before I get to that, I will start with just a one-slide overview as to who we are and what we do and how we do it at Provectis Environmental. And then again, build on a little bit on what Tim had outlined. You know, what is in situ chemical oxidation? I won't spend a lot of time on it. I'm hoping that it's an overview for most of us. But I'll talk about the mode of reaction or the mode of action, the reactions, and oxidation potentials. Then I'll get into some limitations, what I consider the three largest limitations or the biggest limitations with in situ chemical oxidation. And then I'll talk about the technology that we utilize primarily for ISCO that's coupled with a biological component. So I think one of the primary themes that we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years is really the coupling of technologies. And the technology I'll talk about, the ferric iron activated persulfate, is a built-in ISCO plus bio component or components. So with that, just briefly, Perfectis Environmental, really we focus on remediation day in and day out, as well as some R&D. But primarily, 8 hours out of every 10 hours of the day, depending on what day it is, we're reviewing site information and we're developing site-specific remedial designs with the technologies that we offer. Or if those technologies aren't appropriate, we can recommend our clients and partners to some of the folks that you'll hear speaking today. Our backgrounds are diverse, but really we've been focused on environmental consulting and remediation, most of us for the last 15, 20, 30 plus years. And then since the incorporation of Provectus in 2014, our team has been focused on some fairly specific patents and licenses that have been developed for in situ chemical reduction, in situ chemical oxidation, as well as methane inhibition. Really, the underlying focus for us is coupling technologies and figuring out the most cost efficient way to reach remedial goals. We manufacture and sell these technologies. However, we have global and domestic partnerships with injection and drilling and blending contractors. So we do offer quite often turnkey designs with those partners. So we're going to get into just a few slides on in situ chemical oxidation and understanding what's going on with ISCO and how it relates to our industry on a daily basis. I think the easiest way to think about in situ chemical oxidation is really just the removal or the stealing of electrons from contaminants, or at least we hope that we are oxidizing contaminants. ISCO is a non-selective technology, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. It basically will react with not only contaminants, but also other naturally occurring organics. So it is non-selective. So a little bit about the reaction. Tim already did a good job of talking about, permanganate, so I'm not going to get into that. I think the takeaway here with permanganate is that it doesn't require catalyzation or activation to be effective, right? So the first teardrop bullet point here is just showing potassium permanganate reacting with TCE, creating manganese dioxide and chloride. So, complete mineralization. And then we get into the catalyzed or activated oxidant systems. Catalyzed hydrogen peroxide or Fenton's reagent, modified Fenton's reagent. There's a lot of different ways to refer to catalyzed peroxide. But for peroxide and persulfate to be most efficient in the subsurface, get your best bang for your buck, catalyzation activation is strongly recommended in most cases. So with peroxide, the most common activation method is iron to produce the hydroxyl radical, and that's that OH with the unpaired electron there. There's other reactions that produce hydroperoxyl radical, and in some cases, the superoxide radical as well. So here you have hydroperoxyl, superoxide. Superoxides are actually a reductant, but similar to permanganate, you're looking at complete mineralization with these compounds, whether it's chlorinated solvents, petroleum hydrocarbons, or some other compound, some other VOC or SVOC. Similar to peroxide, sodium persulfate or potassium persulfate, I'll talk a little bit about potassium later on. It should be activated in most cases, and it can be activated in a wide array of different methods. So you have the technology I'll talk about today, which is ferric iron, or iron in a +3 valence state, producing the sulfate radical. Again, that's that strong oxidizer, these unpaired electrons. It's going to want to steal electrons and pair that radical. And in some cases, ferrate, which is iron +4 to +6 valence state. And I would consider that site specific. We don't see that all the time. And then you have alkaline activation. That's a common activation method. Typically, we see pHs greater than 10, 10.5, 11, somewhere in there. You're using sodium hydroxide or caustic soda to do it. There's other ways to do it, solid amendments as well. But the alkaline activation is also creating the sulfate radical, and in some cases, the superoxide. You can activate it by heat. You can activate it by peroxide and also ferrous iron. So there's a number of different choices. And again, I'm going to focus on ferric iron activation. All right, so what do those reaction pathways mean to us? And this is starting to get to real life applications and really what we do every day out in the field and here behind our desks or wherever you may be at this point. How do these oxidation potentials relate to destruction of contaminants? And so just showing, the stronger the oxidizer, the higher the oxidation potential. So in the next slide, you'll see how that plays into destruction of contaminants. But just taking it a step further, showing, catalyzed peroxide at the top or Fenton's reagent, where you have that hydroxyl radical being produced, can treat a wide range of contaminants. It has a very short subsurface lifetime. You can use stabilizers, but typically you're talking about, seconds or nanoseconds for that hydroxyl radical. And it can be difficult to apply in reactive soils. Then you have traditional activated persulfate. It treats a wide range of contaminants. When I say traditional, I just mean any activation outside of ferric iron. And you're producing the sulfate radical, a very strong oxidizer. It's slower to form than the hydroxyl. So in some cases, you'll typically see a larger radius of influence. And then the technology I'm going to talk about today, Provectus and also Provectus 2. You'll notice if you either work with us right now or you go on our website, we've creatively named all of our technologies Provect something. So everything is a Provect Ox, Provect I, Provect IRM, and so on and so forth. But Provect Ox, again, it's ferric iron activated persulfate. We're generating sulfate radical, similar to the other traditional activation methods. And then in some cases also ferrate. So it treats a wide range of contaminants, extended in situ lifetime as well. And then I'll talk about how we can avoid rebound with some of the biological back-end components of this technology. I'm not going to get into ozone, and then Tim already touched on permanganate there. So taking it to our favorite contaminants of concern, and again, how these oxidation potentials relate to those. So when you look at the oxidation potentials and the volts of these radicals, you'll quickly see, and Tim touched on this, that something like permanganate is not going to be a good choice for your carbon-carbon bonds like your BTEXs. You're going to need more energy. And so that's why you typically see persulfate or peroxide utilized for polyaromatics and monoaromatic hydrocarbons. Whereas the double carbon PCs and TC, the chlorinated ethenes, you have a wide range of choices. You can go permanganate, go persulfate, you can go peroxide. So, and then of course, I'm not going to get into it, but then you have all the other biological amendments you can use too. So, as promised, I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues associated with the technology that I use every day and that we've had a lot of success with. The first issue is non-beneficial consumption. So we have to determine how much reagent we're going to put into the subsurface. The first calculation that we can do is determine our stoichiometric demand, and that's our contaminant demand. Hopefully the site's been well delineated and investigated. We know what the soil concentrations are. We know what the groundwater concentrations are. We can go ahead and come up with a total contaminant mass within that treatment area. And then we know what the stoichiometric demands are of persulfate or these other oxidants to determine what that total contaminant demand is. So for example, if you have 1 pound of benzene within your treatment area, you know you need approximately 50 pounds of persulfate to completely mineralize that benzene. The gray area is the non-beneficial consumption. This is the soil oxidant demand, the metals, the organic carbon, the decomposition of the oxidant, right? So peroxide is very reactive, so there's a decomposition component. So typically to quantify and determine what this non-beneficial consumption demand is, we recommend total or persulfate natural oxidant demand tests. We can perform those in conjunction with our partners, but these tests provide us a value that can be then used for our total required oxidant demand. So many sites are remediated every day without a total or a natural oxidant demand test conducted. However, again, it's an issue. It's something that if we don't quantify, we don't really know what it is. And I've seen PODs come back at 2 grams of oxidant per kilogram of soil, all the way to 50 grams per kilogram of soil. So you can imagine going to a site that you assume that your oxidant demand is 2 grams per kilogram, and it actually is 25. You're going to fail. The next issue with in situ chemical oxidation, and this is one that's universal, is a rebound. Again, chemical oxidants are fairly short-lived, and I'll talk about that outside of permanganate. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But what we're showing here is some great data sets that were put together by McGuire and al. For groundwater monitoring remediation. And what they did is they took a number of project sites that were remediated with chemical oxidants, and then a number of other sites that were remediated with enhanced bioremediation. We know nothing else about these sites other than the technologies that were utilized. So we don't know geochemistry or geology, soil matrix, depth of injection, what type of remedial method was used, or even what kind of oxidant or bioremediation technology was used. All we know is that these sites were remediated with chemox, these sites with enhanced bio. And what we see on these slides is that if you look at the x-axis showing sampling time in years relative to the initial treatment, what we see at time 0, let's say that's the baseline sample and the point of injection, what we see here at time 0 in the chemox sites is a significant reduction in contaminant mass. And I'm assuming that this is groundwater. And so you see after your first sampling event, you've achieved 80, 90, 90% reductions of total contaminant mass. But then by year 1, year 2, year 3, post-injection, we see that rebound, right? Whereas enhanced bioremediation, it's sort of the other side. On time 0, baseline, time of injection, soil mixing, whatever it may be, we don't see that steep decrease in contaminant concentrations. We see it over a very long time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So we know both technologies work. We know they work well. And it would be great if we could somehow couple these technologies together. Again, that's not a new concept, but it's something that's not utilized as often as it should be, I think. And the last one, again, this ties into the slide before, is longevity. So you can imagine we have a dry cleaner that has been or that was discharging PCE out the back door from 1950 until 1980, and has created this plume. For 30 years they've been discharging chlorinated solvents. Now we've delineated, we've investigated, we've written a remedial action work plan. We're ready to go inject, and we're injecting an oxidant that lasts for minutes or hours within the subsurface to clean up a plume or a source area that was created over 50 years. And so that's the issue that I see with longevity of reagents. They just don't last long enough to take care of that sorbed mass and all those little fine-grained intervals in the subsurface. So, and I like this reference from Hewlett and Pivots from EPA. This is an older one, but table 1 shows that persistence. We already talked about permanganate. We know permanganate has a long lifespan, but phentans and ozone and persulfate, you're talking about minutes to hours or hours to weeks. And you can tell this is old if you look to the right of table 1, the stage of development. I mean, we're talking about developing experimental and emerging remedial tools, but the persistence won't change over time. So what we focused on over the last 5-6 years is taking a ferric iron activated persulfate technology and bringing it to the market to overcome some of these limitations. So it's sodium or potassium persulfate combined with ferric iron oxide, and this is all solid product blended together to produce that very strong oxidizer sulfate. It's a sulfate radical. In some cases, ferrate. We allow the site to go from its natural state to strongly oxidizing with the technology, and then back to the natural state for reduction via sulfate and iron processes. So you're going oxidative to biological attenuation. And this product is all handled without the use of any other chemicals. So just to take it a step further and just to show some of the reactions with the biocide, we just put benzene up there. But again, it's sodium persulfate or potassium persulfate combined with ferric oxide to create those strongly oxidizing conditions, and then allowing the site to attenuate, and then the residual sulfate that's left behind. Every 100 pounds of persulfate you put in the ground, you're going to be left behind 80 pounds of sulfate. So you have plenty of sulfate left behind. Some cases, maybe too much. And then the iron left behind that we introduced from as our activator, and just allow the naturally occurring microbes really to flourish with that sulfate and that iron, and the fact that there's there's going to be residual contamination left. So the difference between Provectox and Provectox 2, yeah, I understand it's not that creative of a name on the Provectox 2 side. We struggle with that. We just said, let's just throw a 2 at the end. It makes it really easy. But Provectox is sodium persulfate combined with ferric oxide, ferric iron oxide, whereas Provectox 2 is potassium persulfate combined with ferric iron oxide. And the reason being is that potassium persulfate has an order of magnitude lower solubility than sodium persulfate. So we're basically extending out that oxidant release. So again, just building on the concept of trying to overcome some of these limitations. Now, instead of just going, fairly short-lived oxidation to bio, now we have long-lived oxidation to bio when it comes to Provectox 2. I should also point out that these are buffered technologies. So we do include a pH buffer, because if you use some of the traditional activation methods, you'll see that sulfuric acid is produced with these processes. So we add a buffer to keep pH neutral. We look at Provectox 2 for permeable reactive barriers and excavations primarily, but it can be utilized for a wide range of applications. So I've got about 5-6 minutes left. So I'm going to summarize the technology and then jump into 2 really quick overview case studies just to show you how we're using these technologies. So again, Provectox 2 and Provectox is chemical oxidation plus sustained bio. Sulfate radical is our primary oxidant that's being utilized to destroy the contaminants, and then in some cases ferrate as well. It's really just site specific. Everything's handled in one bag or one super sack. You can see the super sack at the bottom left, and then there's the bag. There's no heat generated. It's not an exothermic reaction. And then again, we have a pH buffer to ensure that the pH is not a 3 or a 4 when we leave. It's not a silver bullet. We never claim it to be a silver bullet. There's other activation methods that may be more appropriate based on geochemistry and site conditions. But some of the things I like to point out, if you look at chelated iron, the chelator will consume the oxidant. And then if you're talking about alkaline activation with like a caustic soda or 25% sodium hydroxide, I'd really consider handling and safety issues with that, injection of that type of material to activate your persulfate. With that, I'm going to jump into, again, 2 quick case studies to show you how we're utilizing these technologies. The first one is just north of where I am today in beautiful Madison, New Jersey. And these are the types of sites, again, we get involved with a lot. This one's relatively small. Our sites range from 200 square feet to 5 acres. This site had some residual napple, which we're not trying to treat L-napple, but there was some L-napple that was residual at the site that popped in and out intermittently over time. We were really just attacking the sorbed and the groundwater phase with the BTEX trimethylbenzene impacts, about a 1,500 square foot area with a fairly deep treatment interval from 25 to 40 feet below grade. Very dense silts and clays with depth to water at 30 feet below ground surface. The source, the tanks, it was all excavated to the extent practical. There was a building and also an active road, so they couldn't reach all the contamination, which is why we were brought in. Enhanced fluid recovery was utilized for quite some time to remove the light non-aqueous phase liquid. And then about 8,500 pounds of Provectus was applied. Just our goals were to significantly reduce the residual mass, and then of course keep the business open during injection. I'd just like to thank engineering and land planning for allowing me to talk about this site. They're based in Highbridge, New Jersey. You can see their logo in the upper left-hand corner here, the site map, as well as next to our logo. And this is their site map, and I'm just showing, some of the former gasoline USTs, the pump island fuel oil, really standard site that I think a lot of us on the phone call are probably working on. And then you have this active service center as well. Here's the area concern, and there's a road, as you can see here. So you can see why they couldn't excavate all that contaminant mass kind of sandwiched in between an active road and an active building and up along the building. This is where we targeted for Provectus injection. And so the other reason I like to talk about this site, and I always thank engineering and land planning, is because they collected a lot of data. And the data for this site is somewhat textbook and what we really want to see for Provectus injection. So the site impacted with petroleum hydrocarbons. So you had those reducing ORPs when we started injection. After injection, you can see the 2 wells that we were targeting, Mining Well 6R. Mining Well 9 had the little bit of the sheen, a little bit of blips of L-napple. You can see we increased the ORP significantly in 6R. We would have liked to have seen a higher ORP in 9, but still went from reducing to oxidative. And then within 3 months, we're back to reducing conditions already. And this is important too with the pH. Again, we use our blended in the Provectus as our buffer. We call it terroir. And so pH did drop slightly in 6R, but now we're back to pre-existing conditions, which is important for the biological components. And similar to the other presenters, my case studies are typically successful. So BTEX 5,400 parts per billion down to about 134. This is over a 12-month period. And then trimethylbenzene over 10,000 to 984. So good reductions in 6R. And then 9 had a little bit of the product in it, 15,500 to 698 on the BTEX side. Trimethylbenzene about 5,600 down to less than 1,000. So good reductions on that. That's typically how we're utilizing Provectus. That was all done via direct push to those depths as a slurry. And briefly, Provectus 2. Again, we're utilizing Provectus 2 for a wide range of applications, but primarily for excavation and placement, permeable reactive barriers, and sites where we think there's going to be a lot of mass for a long time, and we want that sustained ISCO to keep going. BTEX naphthalene at this site, you can see in the picture quite a bit of excavation had occurred, and then we were introducing 2,000 pound super sacks of Provectus into the subsurface. It's red because of the ferric iron oxide. 94 to 100% reduction of BTEX compounds. I mean, we also did the excavation took place too, so a lot of mass was removed. And so again, this is a great technology to couple with excavation. you have an open excavation. You can do soil blending. You can go ahead and you can see the client put a bunch of gravel in there to account for smearing and groundwater fluctuations, so that oxidant will move up and down. I only talk about petroleum hydrocarbons. We can attack chlorinated solvents as well with these technologies. We can easily oxidize PC, TC, and daughter products. So with that, I've got to turn it over to Bud. But really, we just want you to reach out to us via email or give us a call. Obviously, everything that we do on the site evaluation section is going to be free. Just call us up, let us know what your problem is, and maybe we can help you solve it. We do offer treatability studies. We do quite a few of those through partnerships, and then turnkey contracting options as well. If you want a one-stop shop that can provide the reagents, the design, as well as the remedial implementation, we can do that. And we're located all over the US, as well as we manufacture in Taiwan, Brazil, and currently Italy as well. So if you have international work, by all means, reach out to us. And with that, there's my contact information. I'm easy to find. And just thank you for your attention.